Hey, what is going on, everybody? This is Yuppies and Harpoons. I am a co-host, Joe Mohler, and with me today I have my friend Jacob and my other friend and first guest on the podcast, Dalmasso. A little bit about Dom. Dom and I met on a Facebook page many years ago. And before we get to this Oppenheimer stuff, I got to tell you about this guy because he's who I believe is like the perfect person to bring on when we're going to be talking about one of the most philosophically sophisticated movies of our time, Oppenheimer. So, Dom and I met on a Facebook page, and I don't know, it was just there was like a bunch of, well, Dom, what would you say?
I don't know. It was like, I think we were arguing with some atheists about various things from the Old Testament and kind of pointing out that they were using Christian standards to critique scripture.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of how it started.
Something like that. Yeah, it was funny, and yeah. I think at the time I was interested in potentially starting some like podcast of my own. This was must have been like three years ago by now, I think, right?
Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago.
2 to 3,
maybe 2.5. Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. Yeah, and you were interested.
And I remember we talked about it too over the phone. Yeah.
Right.
And then I invited you for some episodes, and yeah. Sorry, we're overlapping.
I went back and I listened to some of them. Oh man, I was like, I had no idea what I was doing. No idea. Yeah. But for those who are interested,
you guys have grown up quite a bit, haven't you?
Well, actually, tell you what. Instead of me, going on and on and on, tell us a little bit about your podcast. What exactly you specialize in? And how you got started, and what made you want to get started.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks to both of you guys, Joe and Jacob, to have me on the show. And so my podcast is called The Logos Project. It deals mostly with theology and culture, so especially the theology of Joseph Ratzinger, but many other theologians, and a little bit of church politics.
That's the Pope.
That kind of content isn't.
That's Pope Benedict the 16th.
Yes, Pope Benedict the 16th. Yeah. Sorry, I should have specified that. That's important. But yeah, and so some church politics, but I don't enjoy making that stuff because, controversy always attracts people and not always the best behaved people. But mostly it's just theology and, just the mysteries of the Christian faith and Scripture and the history of theology, stuff like that. So that's in a nutshell the Logos Project.
Well, one of the
I think it's
coolest
worth
things...
saying. Everyone should go check it out there real quick after they finish this episode and check out Dom's podcast, The Logos Project.
Thanks.
They should, and one of the reasons they should is because someone whom I have an immense amount of respect for, Bishop Barron and Word on Fire, recommended that they go over and visit the Logos Project. Bishop Barron is someone who I have listened to for years, and I was on Twitter one day and I saw him recommending the guy who I think I was his first guest on his podcast. And I'm like, what is this? And I think it was an episode on Henri de Lubac, the great French, French cardinal.
Yeah. So I don't know if it was Bishop Barron himself, but it was someone at the Word on Fire Institute. And it was a episode on the relationship between nature and grace and theology, but especially Cardinal Henri de Lubac's position on it, his theology, the way he explains it. And it's a pretty complicated topic. It's a huge debate in Catholic theology. And it's very interesting, but so it was a great time. And that was Dr. Richard Decloux that I had on, and he read up on Cardinal de Lubac, and he's a huge Pope Benedict fan as well. So we speak the same language. Every time he says something, it's like I understand what he's saying. When we're talking about Benedict, I can like read his mind.
Yeah, that's super cool. It's really cool, like when you see, especially like someone that you like met and like just watched how they started a podcast, and then just seeing him like all of a sudden be recommended and having these very prestigious recommendations in their field. I mean, it's just that's super cool. So that's a big accomplishment. Also, I think we have to make this more of a tradition. What are you gents drinking? I have a little, very, very basic Knob Creek with me, drinking it neat. Jacob?
What about you, Jacob?
Yep. I got here Namaste. It's a Dogfish. Dogfish Head brewery. So yeah, pretty great. It's a Belgian style white, which is what grabbed my attention. But
And
so far,
I have fruit punch because I'm doing a dry contest with some friends, and the first one to drink loses. So we're going on several weeks now. So
You're doing a contest to see who can not drink beer, not drink
the
alcohol.
longest, no alcohol. That's right, the longest. Yeah.
Yeah. Well. Okay. Well, I'm also involved in my own contest. I don't know exactly how I'll perform, but obviously it's more invigorating than whatever the hell you're into. So, jeez. Okay. Well, with that, what? So I'll tell you, I have to say I've never done like reviews on movies ever. That's never been something, and I never really envisioned myself doing something like this. But I recognized Christopher Nolan's name when I saw the trailer come out about Oppenheimer, and I just was like, every time I hear his name, people say good things about him, and so I googled him, and I realized, holy crap, this guy's like made all of my favorite films. He's made Interstellar, he's made Inception, he's made The Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Rises Again. He's made I think it was Tenet was another one, Dunkirk, and I'm like, I've seen all of these, and they're like they're some of my favorite movies, and so, but I've never been,
especially with biops as well. I mean, he really has just hit the cruise control on these. I mean, from Dunkirk to now Oppenheimer, but also Batman is almost shot in a similar way, where you really feel that emotional connection to characters. You have these amazing film sequences, the shots he takes, obviously his lack of CGI, and kind of exploring from there. He really knows how to put on movies.
I totally agree, Jacob, especially the way he does special effects. You know, I think Christopher Nolan, alongside that Canadian director, Denis Villeneuve, I think they're the two like top shots right now, the two hot shots in Hollywood right now. You know, Hollywood is filled with interesting people, to say it as charitably as possible, but I think Nolan and Villeneuve are interested in telling good stories. Now, that doesn't mean that like certain kinds of politics might not come into their movies, but like you can tell they like telling stories and they want to tell good ones and they want to tell them well, and that's why they use like minimal amounts of special effects. And I think people appreciate that, especially in this digital age, right? Where it's like we're bombarded with all this. Fake is not a nice way to put it, but you know what I mean, right? The kind of imaging reality instead of presenting reality to us. And you know, I actually learned that Christopher Nolan doesn't have a cell phone. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, he uses a flip phone, and basically you can't get a hold of him even with that.
Yeah, I think that's very wise.
Well, some of these guys in Hollywood. Another one I like is Tom Hanks. You know, he still like writes letters on a typewriter, and
really,
yeah, he's all into like, and somebody thought that was like a biographical piece that he put in to make himself look better, and then they found, and then the reporter who like wrote that went to a typewriter shop because they were into typewriters, and they saw Tom Hanks there buying typewriters.
That's funny.
So, it was funny. But to get back to, I guess, the brief intro, all I wanted to say was that basically Oppenheimer was the first movie I ever went to based on who the director was, because I have never paid attention to directors. I just look, basically, I have to be honest, I'm like very, very lazy. I just go off of the trailer. Does it look cool? Sure, I'll go see it. But Oppenheimer's like, this guy hasn't missed, and I'm just going to go and see it. And I was blown away. I was blown away by the movie. And it kind of just made me want to open up, like, one, did you guys have, with a couple questions, like, one, did you guys have the same impression? And two, why do you think Christopher Nolan, who's really done a lot of like sci-fi, futuristic movies, this is almost a different like genre of cinema that he hasn't really explored before. Like, what do you think went into his decision to make a movie about Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Dom, do you
Jacob, what
want to
do you
go
think?
first? And I have some thoughts. I have some loaded thoughts there afterwards.
Okay, yeah, real quick. I think that even though it is a different kind of Nolan film, all of the signature Nolan marks are there. I mean, there's this preoccupation with science. There's this preoccupation with the future, like and the implications of technology and the future of humanity. I mean, it's all there, right? And what human beings are, and like, um, you know, this idea that the world will be destroyed in the future is in Tenet. It's in Interstellar. It's in what else is it in? Dunkirk is a war movie, so I guess war counts. Maybe I don't know. But I mean, even in right, the odds are always cataclysmic in Nolan movies, and so all the Nolan, uh, I know why he liked the book. Basically, right? American Prometheus, right? The story of Oppenheimer. I think he liked it because it's about all of those themes, and those themes seem to recur in his movies. But it definitely is a biography. It's not a sci-fi film. But even his sci-fi, and this last thing I'll say, even his sci-fi is very scientific, which is, I think, appealing to the audience. Like Interstellar,
Mm-hmm.
he goes through the trouble to get Einstein's theories correct, right? And I think that's appealing to the audience, and that could also open up a whole discussion on the nature of science and its relationship to morality, especially with the bomb. But I'll stop there. So
Yeah, I think well said. I kind of want to echo a lot of what you just said, to be honest. Like the odds are kind of cataclysmic. This I feel like is everything he has worked for in a movie. So you can see so many different aspects of like Interstellar, going back to what you said there about getting the science right behind it, the physics, like what he was grappling with in that movie, and then somehow being able to translate that to the common, man is amazing and making it interesting. To be able to tell these really compelling stories like Dunkirk, just focusing on one individual and spanning a 3-hour movie filled with content with emotional, the way he shoots the movie, so the whole black and white versus color sequences, that goes back to Momentum, one of his earliest films, which
that's right.
I mean, that's one of the key points in that movie. And if you haven't seen it, it's been about 5 years since you're going, so spoilers were deserved. But yeah, and then even the different ways of handling volume, suspense with the volume, when to have fast talking versus these long drawn out slow sequence that you would see towards the end of the movie when he's on stage and has kind of this, I don't know, anxiety, mental state happen. There's all these different speeds of volume that he plays with that you see in all the other movies that he's done. This really brings them together in such a wonderful way, making it very interesting, playing around with people's personalities in a way that elevates them and makes them respected, but doesn't hide some of the questionable things they do, really making sure that that's forefront of these are flawed human beings that we're working with. Even in Batman, he's a superhero, but very flawed. I really appreciate him wrestling and connecting the human problem with his movies and making it.
Yeah, and the way he uses time, I think, is a good way to create build-up and climactic moments that intersect, right? He does this in Interstellar, especially in Inception, right? When you have the different timelines, but he does this in Dunkirk as well. And all the timelines we're following 3 different timelines usually. In Inception, it's like what, 4, 5? I don't remember. Yeah. But what he does is he it's almost like he has a script for each timeline, and there's like the kind of story arc that you find in like Aristotle's Poetics, right? You have the introduction, the development of the characters, the problem of the plot, which is resolved, and then the kind of what they call in French the denouement, right? When everything comes together at the end, the catharsis. He does that, but with each timeline, and so it's almost like you have a God's eye view from the top to the bottom through time in his stories, and it really captures your attention, unlike a purely linear story would do. And I think I appreciate that. A lot of people complain about I got confused what timeline we were on, but that just means you need to see it more times.
It kind of follows the outline of a fish, where like you start small and then it gets big and then it goes again.
Exactly.
And I think another thing it does is it keeps suspense throughout the entire film. Like the whole time as you're watching this film, we all know kind of his end if you studied him briefly, how he's questioned by McCarthyism. So, but the whole time you kind of see this slowly playing out like a rat going through a snake. It's not going to end well, but it's like you're watching it the whole time, and you're not really sure how it's going to fit in to then this positive linear progression of the movie where he's having fun and finding friends and a woman, really, in his case. And so you have this, like, these parts that are kind of, there's no suspense, there's no controversy in them. They're just parts of his life that need to be told but don't really keep your attention there, are being held because he keeps throwing us back, but this isn't going to end well. And it keeps that forefront too.
A quick shout out also, I think you can't talk about this film without briefly mentioning the composer, Ludwig. I can never get his last name right, but Göransson.
I'm not going to try. Yeah.
Yeah, Ludwig Göransson. He did the Mandalorian series, I think. And so that was obviously iconic.
And he did Tenet.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tenet as well.
He's done other Nolan films. And but his
and the music in Tenet is actually playable backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I cut you off.
I didn't know that. But like the thing I was thinking about was, how do these guys, like, what comes first? Does the scene come first, or does the music follow? And the music follow, or is there kind of an immersion of the two at the same time? Or I doubt it's the music first and then the production of the movie. But like you see all these, I guess these ellipses, and like one of my favorite scenes in Oppenheimer is when he's asked, "Can you hear the music?" And then he just looks up to the stars, and then you see all these spheres and ellipses going around, and then they're like, going up and down like really, really fast, and it's like a vibration, and you can feel it in the music. He's like, "Yes, I can hear it," and it's just incredible, and it really, I thought, elaborate on the genius of what this man was able to conceptualize in his own head, which is like, not only can you hear the music, but can you see it?
I think
like,
that's
yeah. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite part of the movie is his early education. The way he, it talks about, because you often in theology you have different ways of doing theology, and there's the very scholastic way, which is the way to dissect, and it's very scientific, and that's great, and we need that, right? But then there's more like spiritual theology, which is more poetic, and we need that too. But how do you marry both, right? And I really enjoy reading and studying Ratzinger, and he's been called the Mozart of theology, because when you read him, it's not like reading a document in law school, or it's not like reading a poem from Shakespeare, but it's like reading a symphony from Mozart, right? And so the whole beginning of that movie to me was my favorite part, because you see this man seeing the way the music of the world, that's kind of what physics is, right? The music of the world, and he can see it, but he even says he wasn't very good at math. I mean, not as good as other people that worked for him, but he had a vision of the whole, when other people were better with like certain parts, certain aspects, like little details, how to dissect something. So that was my favorite part, that whole beginning of him hearing the music of but spoiler alert, I think Nolan should have portrayed him more as a villain, but I won't press the issue too much. But.
Well, before there'll be plenty of time for that, but let's stay focused on that hear the music thing, because I think I think, to throw out a classic at you, the hearing of the music reminds me of Tolkien, of like the Valar hearing the music of Au, and it's just like there's something unique about the human, about our ability to hear the music, to conceptualize the music of the world, to understand it, and
of creation,
of creation, and like you can see like that Oppenheimer clearly recognizes that there's something significant about being able to hear the music, but but honestly, kind of through like the whole movie, there's like it's kind of done through this shade of like kind of a creeping darkness, and I feel like in that moment it's like it's beautiful, but it's it's not what it could be. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but
Mhm.
there's this recognition that this is something that is unique about human beings, that we have the ability
Mhm.
to understand the universe, to be able to understand physics, to understand how the Earth rotates around the sun, or understand how life evolves, or to understand how to make beautiful art,
Yeah.
to how to build societies. Like,
Yeah.
and there's something very, very unique about that. Um,
It's
and
a driving factor of humanity in a way.
yes,
Is that creative outlet? But
Hmm.
right, right.
No, absolutely. I mean, and
sorry for cutting off.
No, you're
no, you're
fine.
good. There's a little bit of lapse, and that's why if ever I cut someone off, I'm not doing it on purpose. It's because of the lapse.
No, you're fine.
I'll
um,
You're
take it
totally
personally
fine.
every time.
um, but yeah, I mean, and I think that's really fascinating because the movie brings up the question of science, obviously, and morality. I mean, that's kind of the heart of the movie with the bomb. But it's like we understand the music of the world, right? It's almost like we hear the reasonability in the world, like the logos inside creation, and we marvel at it, and we also realize that when we understand it, we can use it as tools to help us, right? So the whole idea of technology, and I think that's when the moral question shows up, because I think sometimes people think that there's like progress for progress's sake, because they think that like the more we progress scientifically, we'll end up in a utopia somehow, right? I think the bomb is a perfect example as to how you actually end up in hell, I think. But the point being, and you guys can push back, but the point I'm making is that I think that there's different kinds of progress. Like, there's also moral progress. There's also progress in meaning, progress in how we understand technology, and how far we should go, and progress and understanding of all these different facets. But also, like, I think sometimes people are so enamored by physics that they forget that the scientific method, right, is the reason why it works so well is because it reduces reality to a certain set of propositions, and that makes it practical to use for our advantage in technology. So a good example is like, if you have appendicitis, right, and you're at the hospital, right, someone who knows medical science, what they're going to do is they're going to put you into a coma so they can open you up and get rid of the appendix, which is causing you trouble and could explode and kill you. So what they have to do is they have to treat you as if you were dead in order for the methodology of science to work. But once they're done, you wake up and you're not as if dead anymore. You're alive again. So it's like science has to kind of ignore several facets of reality and focus on a certain aspect of reality at the expense of others in order to be efficacious. But then the problem I see is that people are walking around treating people as if they were dead instead of realizing that's just how science views things. But there's more to it than that. I guess, and the point of me bringing that up is because if everything is atoms in the void, then the moral questions become very hard to answer. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no,
Right?
that makes
Yeah,
complete sense.
because to add to that, it's like, we talk when we talk about the religious question, we ask the question: is there life after death? But if you have this scientific worldview that is, all encompassing, and it's merely scientific, right? And you don't realize that science has to reduce things in order to be effective, then what happens is the question isn't anymore, is there life after death? The question is there life before death?
Hmm.
Right? Because, like, if we're all just atoms in the void, then morality, the best morality, is consequentialism. Like, how do we make things more pleasurable for us atom meatballs, right? Or like this atom conglomeration. And I don't know, does that make sense? Like, morality gets checked out the window, or it just becomes consequentialist if it's like, if we view the world that way. So it's like you're hearing part of the symphony, but you're missing out on like a whole other aspect of the melody, which is the whole question of what does it mean to be a person? What is politics about? What is technology? Is it good to like develop technology so much that it ends up enslaving us? Think of cell phones. Anyway, I'm on a soapbox, but do you guys see what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
Are you because you're kind of talking about, I think at this point, not even just the bomb that was dropped on Japan
Just
twice,
technology. Yeah.
but you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
general like technology as a whole. There's some really important thoughts. Oh, there's important conversations that need to be had about any technology.
Yeah.
Some definitely have a little bit more heavy weight, such as making an atomic
The
bomb.
bomb. Yeah. Yeah.
But the same thing as smartphones, where 15 years ago, almost no one had iPhone. Well, 2007 they launched. Very shortly after, everyone's walking around with these, and it's like there was no conversation. It was just a really great product. People adopted it, and we've moved forward. And now we're looking back as a society and saying, like, was that good? Was that bad? And then how do we, if it is bad, how do we even address it from here? Is that a little bit of kind of where you're going with that?
Yeah,
You
and I think
you can't use.
Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Oh yeah, you're fine. You can't
Mhm.
use like progress as a hermeneutic in of itself, because like progress, it has to, you have to progress from something in some certain direction, and so it's kind of like evolution. There's lots of evolutions that don't work. And so like if you look at like 99.9999 percent of species have just evolved into extinction. And so there's kind of like this idea out there that technology, just because you come up with some sort of like a new um, like a new product, that's somehow better, or some new sort of political system that's just better because it's new. There in of itself, progress can't interpret its own like moral legitimacy.
Exactly. Yeah, progress isn't a justification; it's an observation, and it might be
Right.
good, but it's not like good in itself necessarily. You know. And I think that the reason why we're talking about this because it leads up to that first question, which is, was it moral to create the bomb? And I want to question, like, let's first understand what is technology. We can't really say, was it good to progress technologically before we ask ourselves, what is technology? Why do we even do it? Like, why do we develop technology? And I think like there's two different answers. And sorry if I'm hogging the conversation, but I'll just say this. I think there's one answer, which is we do it because we're good stewards that need tools to be effective in helping the common good of the polis, right? Of society, of the world that's been given to us. But the other answer, I think I actually have a quote here. It best encapsulates the other aspect. It's from Ratzinger. He says, technology, and here he's talking about the second type of aspect, right? Is an attempt to banish the dominion of the unknown, to domesticate the power of the universe, and to leave no unknown power, no untamed force behind. And so I think the reason why that's bad is because it presupposes a kind of radical like fear of the cosmos. Like we feel like we're at its mercy. And technology is a way of liberation. And if you look at the way they talk about the bomb in the movie, I mean, come on, like, let me just read to you what it says right here in the movie. It says, Niels Bohr says to Oppenheimer, right? He says, is it big enough? And he says, to win the war? And Bohr says, to end all wars. And at one part, someone says, this isn't a new weapon, it's a new world. And then one person says, when you talk, they hear a prophet. When they hear Strauss talk, they hear themselves. And then another one, this is the best one. The atomic bomb is a terrible revelation of divine power. I mean, I think it's like this. There's this bad aspect of technology is this like search for radical liberation from the constraints of the cosmos because we fear it. And ultimately that means a liberation from God where we become Prometheus, right? And that's the whole idea behind the book. And especially I'm on a soapbox again, sorry, but like the whole scenes when he's in that room and they're interrogating him and when he's like being humiliated, like that's
Is
like
this
a
in front of
direct
his
reference.
wife, that
Yes.
when he's
Yeah.
sitting in front of his wife there?
Exactly. Like that's Prometheus on the rock naked with the eagle eating his liver out and the liver growing back every day and he's there being tormented. And at one point his wife says, you think they will forgive you if you let them tar and feather you? And he says, we'll see. Right? But like he's living the trajectory of Prometheus in the Greek play, Prometheus Bound.
But
And it has
wouldn't
everything
you
to
say?
do with technology.
wouldn't you say that part of the this is part of the paradox of the creative spark, right, in humanity? Because you can look at, I mean, I can say an obvious statement like technology has liberated so many like pre-existing problems. Like we're
Hmm.
many less people on average are hungry than were
Yeah.
50 years ago. You can look at people's access to clean water. You can look at people having access to things like more luxurious items like air conditioning, being able to
Yeah.
communicate with people across the world now instantaneously. Like there are lots of things that, but it's like we always carry this baggage with us no matter where we go. And on top of that, um, I think there is like a chicken and egg question here, which is, does the like what actually comes first? Like when we want to progress technologically, are we doing so out of wanting to like defeat an existential threat, or are we doing so for the betterment of humanity? What is
Yeah.
that? Because the 40s were one of the most innovative periods in human history. I mean, you have nuclear submarines being created. I mean, obviously, and if you extend it back through the 20s and the 10s, I mean, you have aviation coming onto the scene. You have the Industrial Revolution, which happened a couple of decades prior to that. I mean, but at the same time, you're seeing this buildup of military technology. I mean, how quickly did the airplane go from something that was cool and fun to do with the Wright brothers into something that was
Yeah.
flying over the over Normandy? It's like the and so I think that
Yeah.
there is a fundamental question here of, do we innovate for the sake of creating for of the sake of creating harmony, or do we
Hmm.
innovate because we're afraid of something?
Yeah,
Or are
dude.
we naked in the
Well,
garden?
and I think also there's the whole aspect of we might innovate for one thing and the outcomes are separate, and that's kind of the
Yeah.
case in physics. So you talk about in the movie they talk about I'm blanking on his name. He's like, I don't want 300 years of physics going to leading to this. Talking about the bomb,
Yeah,
there's the
that's
whole
right. Yeah.
idea that this was not something that was new. This was something they've been trying to achieve for years and decades, if not longer than that, since they really thought of the theory. Now they're trying to implement it. Just so happens the easiest way for them to do so is to create a bomb, because they could throw $2 billion into this project, which with
Hmm.
inflation is a insane amount of money. So it would have taken probably many more decades, if not way longer than that, to get to the point that they wanted to as scientists, as people who are creative, who have this incredible gift, but don't have the resources because the resources are just that large in dollar amounts to make it practical. But then
I
out of that,
yeah.
so you take away the bomb aspect of it. Look at what nuclear has done elsewhere. The amount of research and different innovations that have come are probably countless. Like we probably couldn't even create a list today of the research that was done there, setting the groundwork for future innovation and technology that is almost explicitly good. Whether it's medical research or other things. It's kind of had this amazing butterfly effect from that way, which is where you can get like this could be morally okay. It's hard for me to say good, but
Yeah.
it's not not negative explicitly. It was then the
Yeah.
way it was used, which I think a lot of the movie kind of touches on that throughout the entire movie of what are
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
actually doing here? Is our dreams and our goals in life building something that we ultimately won't be able to live with, but
Well,
we'll be able
there,
to do what we want.
yeah, there's one point I want to drive at, and I kind of want to throw it back at you guys to see what you think. I was listening to a podcast recently. I forget where he was, but one of my favorite authors is Yuval Noah Harari. For anyone who doesn't know who he is, he wrote the book *Sapiens*, Homo Sapiens, and also wrote a book called *Homo Deus*, and then 21 Rules for the 21st Century. All of them are spectacular, and I mean I don't agree with everything in them, but one of the things that he's emphasized is that intelligence might be not necessarily the best trait to have if you want to survive, because there's this there's this question out there, about whether or not there's other civilizations, and now I always find these to be kind of silly questions because we don't, in my view, have the technology to have any clue if there's other civilizations out there. And so, but setting that aside, there's this question out there of, are there other intelligent species out there that live on planets similar to ours? And if you look at the math and you look at the distance of the Earth from the Sun, multiply that by the amount of stars there are in stellar systems, you would think that there would be a lot of opportunity for life. And one of the theories for why we don't see it is because, like, societies, when they build up and become complex enough, they end up destroying themselves. And so you're more likely to find another planet with a bunch of crocodiles on it than you are with a bunch of human beings, because the intelligence is not something that you want to place your bets on for survival. And I guess what I kind of want to go from here on is why is that, and how are we supposed to think about it?
Well, I think so.
Yeah, simplify your question a little bit there too. Just go a little bit more specific of like where you're trying to get at exactly, Joe.
Basically, what I'm asking
is intelligence a curse or a blessing for
civilization
and progress?
Well said.
Well, I think because everything that we've been talking about so far kind of is about the question of is technology a curse or a blessing? That's really the Promethean question, right? And well, for Prometheus, it's a curse. I mean, he got cursed for giving it to man. But for man, it's a blessing, at least in the Promethean story. But I think we have to ask the question: what technology is technology about? Ethics, or is it about eschatology? And what I mean by that is like technology is meant to help us. So if the end is progress, then anything goes because everything is subordinate to that end. But if the end is the good of society, then technology is subordinated to that end, to the end of the moral good. So my point being is that technology, because you brought up,
but technology is subordinated to human intelligence,
to the moral good.
Right now, the curse of technology is that it is subordinated to human intelligence, right? And it should serve the end good, or it will serve as like an eschatological prophecy.
Well, so I guess the question is not whether intelligence is a curse or a blessing, but I think it's a curse if you treat it in a certain way, and it's a blessing if you treat it in another way, right? Mm-hmm. And so because you brought up clean water, air conditioning, all those things, that's technology being used for the common good, right? But that's distinguishable from technology used to usher in a new world, and that always ends up, as we've seen, with bloodshed. So in other words, it's the same with politics. Politics is about ethics, right? If you vote for certain policies, you vote for certain people, you support certain things, you do things in your own city, your mayor, all that kind of. Politics is about what's right and what's wrong. The whole, like, you can have debates and arguments about immigration. Okay, the ultimate question is what's right and what's wrong. Should a nation be able to protect itself, to sustain itself, or should we take in people for shelter? Debate.
And I think politics gets a little bit more complicated because you're saying what's right, what's wrong for certain populations of people, and then you have to kind of expand
it's
out
specific,
from there, right?
Yeah.
So
there's no
you're
black
talking
and
about
white.
A certain issue, like let's say trade policy. Having tariffs might be really good for people in the Midwest where there's a little bit more manufacturing than, say, Manhattan. That's really going to be bad for Manhattan because
having
trade
terrorists.
Tariffs. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, tariffs.
Tariffs will be bad. Let's make my I'm gonna make 2 points here. So tariffs, I think, are universally bad. I don't know if there's comments on that or pushback. Tariffs, but it might be bad for people sitting in Manhattan who are importing, exporting. That's not good, right? So but then overall, are tariffs good for the country and then the common push? That's where politics then takes this right or wrong question. It kind of applies it like unevenly to different populations so that all populations can ideally get pushed above. And let's not break down into like populations that were marginalized. But
that's the thing. It's still about right and wrong. It's not about making Earth into a new paradise, right? So that would be like how you would distinguish between, I would say, the atomic bomb and medical care, right? It's like, or communism and free market is the way I would put it, right? Communism is like the idea that we're gonna get rid of oppression completely in the near future if we have this revolution, and so it's like a program that we apply eschatologically to create a new world, as opposed to like free market or just ethical exchange, and like all we're doing is applying principles of right and wrong right now. So I guess all I'm saying is that that's to just wrap up kind of what I was trying to to say is that basically I think it's not a coincidence that Oppenheimer has ties to the Communist Party and is involved in the making of the bomb and after the bomb of the publicity on it, because the same vision behind um, this idea that we're going to make the world a better place through a particular program. In other words, it's an eschatological vision, right? We're going to make the world, we're going to get rid of all problems in the world through technology or through a political program. Then, it can justify the means that we're using. I mean, they say this over and over in the movie, right? The bomb is a manifestation of divine power. The bomb is going to end all wars. The bomb is going to create a new world. They keep on saying this. And if you read Marx, he's saying the same thing. Marx is saying this over and over again. And so my point ultimately is that if politics and technology is about ethics, then we can talk about whether we should go in a certain direction or not, whether things are justified or not, here and now. But if politics and technology is about eschatology, then you get Marxism, and I would argue the atomic bomb, which is means are justified to create a paradise. Because at the end of the day, morality is about the consequence of a utopia, regardless of how we get there, because we want to be liberated from from the cosmos, because the cosmos is uncertain. And so that's really, Ratzinger brings this up over and over again. That's kind of the point I wanted to make. And that's why I find it interesting that Oppenheimer has those connections.
That's actually a solid point, because you're getting into like why paradise on earth established by humanity so often has to be forced through tyranny and power. Like, because we don't have any sort of metaphysics that we can operate with if we're just creating our own values. That's why, like, Nietzsche, when he talks about that God is dead, he's talking about how we're going to be in a bind because we're going to have to create our own system of values, and the only thing we know is the will to power. And it's an interesting point, and I think when you combine that with just one of my favorite themes in the movie is how Nolan he never hides the honest humanity of the great minds of the 30s and 40s. I mean, we see with Heisenberg that he folds to the Nazis, and and you see in Oppenheimer, you see this man who's just riddled in scandals. I mean, just riddled in scandals. Tries to poison his professor. Tries to, has an affair. And that becomes
at least two affairs,
massive contention. What's that?
At least two affairs
Multiple
mentioned
affairs,
in the movie.
Yeah, at least. At least. And so he's a man who's also, I think also he has a moral sense about him. But what I think Nolan brilliantly brings to the table is that intelligence by no means guarantees safety for humanity. But intelligence by no means brings about the paradise. It only brings about the the fist, if you will.
Yeah. That's my point about science. If we view the world only through science, then it makes sense to create an atomic bomb. It makes sense to all means are good, because anyway, yeah.
Well, one of the early scenes in the movie too, when he finds out his Emily Blunt's character is pregnant, and he's breaking the news to who becomes his mistress, essentially. He says brilliance makes up for a lot. Like, he says that himself. Kind of this whole idea, like, I feel like that captures the scene that, like, I'm very smart and I can get away with certain things.
Yeah.
I think it goes beyond ethics and eschatology. I think there's a whole idea.
I think he knows that isn't true.
There's a part of him who does, right? That's why he's bringing the mistress flowers. It's like he wants to be romantic, but he can't.
Hmm.
I think there's a whole
Yeah.
push and drive of humans being creative and pushing the boundaries of what is possible. I think that's a
Yeah.
core factor of human beings. And then afterwards, oftentimes, then the questions of ethics and eschatology, kind of that's the debate. Then it's a second wave.
Yeah.
You see this with the Silicon Valley right now. There's so many early executives of Google, Facebook, these massive businesses that are coming out saying the work I did was probably bad, right? And now they're
Mhm.
quitting their jobs. They're leaving these massive salaries because they have this whole ethical dilemma,
Mhm.
where you kind of like the movie. I feel like wrestles with that of how much did this impact him personally, that the weight of creating something so destructive, while at the same time never really separating the excitement that comes from their accomplishments. As soon as the bomb explodes, everyone breaks out in a cheer. There's a few people there that you have the heavy weight on them. Pretty quickly, there's still that like there's a sense of like pride. This is what we created, even though they know fully what will happen, whether they knew exactly Japan was the target or that eventually this is going to be used to kill thousands of people in one swell swoop. And,
Yeah.
and I don't think they had an answer for that. I think that's where the point I really want to make here. They were phenomenal scientists. They were the best of the best. I think that's why he was picked in the first place, because they couldn't find anyone even close to what he could do and accomplish. But then you have this whole question of him being commie and being part of the whole sympathizing with that line of thought. But that wasn't his objective. His objective was to be the best physicist there was and lead a team to develop this bomb. Whether or not he knew how to run a country and policies, that comes second. And as soon as his need to be a physicist is fulfilled, the bomb is built, then they start talking about the other stuff that they let slip under the radar until
Yeah.
it would be relevant.
But yeah, see, that's the thing. I would say we probably should have started talking about that before, right? Because it's not because someone wants to do something that it's good. Like,
Right.
so it's the question of like, yes, we can do a lot with our technology and our science, but what ought we to do? That's the
Yeah.
moral question. The moral question precedes the question of science. In fact, I would
So,
say, yeah.
well, I
Sorry,
was
go
going to
ahead.
ask, like, there was I think there's a pretty big quote here, where Oppenheimer, he's asked, you drop the bomb, or he's told, you drop the bomb on the just and the unjust, and his response is, I don't
Yeah,
know if we can be trusted with atomic weapons, but I know that the Nazis cannot. Um,
yeah,
what what is the right thing to do when you know that um, when you know that your enemy has plans to
yeah.
inflict massive amounts of massive amounts of casualties,
Hmm.
to inflict massive amounts of casualties on your own people? Um, do you have a moral duty to be able to craft something that would deter them from taking that action?
Yeah. Um, I think it was yeah, it's Elizabeth Anscombe said here, let me real quick make sure I get the quote right. Just a second. I thought this was really telling. She wrote, weapons are now manufactured whose sole point is to be used in massacre of cities. But the people responsible are not murderous because they have these weapons. They have them because they are murderous. So I guess it's like, is there really no means to stop the Nazis if, let's say, they made the bomb, right? Um, or maybe we could have built the bombs that would have targeted military complexes. I don't know, but like, I don't know if you could fully say that the ends justify the means. Like it's like, if someone is uh, murdering children, but they'll stop if you murder their children. That's kind of the ultimate question, right? Which is like, can you murder the children to save the other children?
Well, what would it be? I think what would
Yeah,
the argument would be it would be similar to like the Catholic teaching on saving the life of the mother and not directly
Yeah, I see.
killing the child,
Yeah,
the unborn, the prenatal human being.
right. Yeah, yeah,
And
And so like if you have no other choice,
yeah.
like if it, you know, like so for instance, if there's a guardsman standing outside
Hmm.
a facility that he's not aware of is being used to develop the Nazi nuclear program, for instance,
Yeah,
is it okay to, you know, if you use modern technology, to use a drone strike,
right.
wipe him out, and maybe some other people with the debris who are innocent in exchange for saving the lives?
Yeah,
My argument would be that that would be morally justified,
yeah,
because you did not seek out to use their death as a means to bring about a greater good over evil.
yeah,
You sought to do a specific action, and one of the downstream consequences of that action
hmm,
that you didn't have sole control over was that there was an innocent bystander near the facility.
yeah, yeah. But what complicates things with the bomb is that it's designed to wipe out innocence, like by its very nature, right? Unless you have this impossible scenario where a whole city is only soldiers, you know.
Well,
So yeah,
and
couldn't
then
you say that a bullet is designed to? Couldn't you say that like like for instance like a gun is
hmm,
it can be meant to shoot bears, it can be meant to shoot home intruders, or it can be meant to shoot school children.
yeah.
Right? There's all sorts of different ways that it's something
But you can't use a
that.
bomb to kill a bad guy only, right? But you can use a gun to do that.
and I think there's a very important thing to bring up about this scenario here. We can, you
Hmm.
know, this scenario becomes a little unique, and I think it becomes difficult to compare to almost any other situation. When you look at the alternative options that the U.S. had, we have today, we are still handing out Purple Hearts that were made in preparation to invade Japan. So if the US had not made
Hmm.
this bomb and they had to go through with a land invasion of mainland Japan, we have that many Purple Hearts still in like the government today to hand out
Hmm.
because there's going to be that many casualties. And so from a US perspective, we have this war, it's starting to drag out. We're in year 4 of this really devastating war that's completely shaped daily life in America as well. You have the internment camps to people collecting scrap metal everywhere they can just to help with the war efforts. I mean, everything is completely different. And then you have, are we going to send millions of Americans into Japan to finish
Yeah,
this? Or are we going to send 2 planes over and there's going to be a few 100,000 casualties instead of potentially millions, if not more, and we don't really understand how that's going to play out.
yeah.
Because at
I
the same time,
I
they played their cards. They didn't really know if the bombs would work. They only had
I mean,
2, and they surrendered. But
yeah,
that's me as a devil advocate there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
well,
yeah.
I would just say I don't think that you had to. So I don't think the choice was we either do a land invasion or we bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Like one of the like if you read the internal debates that surrounded like the minutes for those meetings where they reviewed to decide what action they were going to take, it was debated of whether or not like you could, you know, detonate a atomic bomb like off the coast of Japan to show them that we had the capacity to do it. We could have detonated and blown up one of their islands. We could have hit a military base that had no surrounding civilians. Um, and the argument was no, what we need to do, we need to blow up their city so that they know that their people will not survive. Give them evidence they cannot refute that their people will be radiated and blown to bits.
Yeah.
And they need living proof of that. And that was ultimately the reason. And so what my critique of that is, because I think that there were ways that you could have worked around dropping a bomb on Nagasaki, but still
Yeah.
not having to do a land invasion. I think what we could have done is or at least we could have tried. Like, I think that's
Yeah.
the big argument is that we could have detonated atomic bombs outside of Japan on an island to show that we had the capacity. And then if they still didn't, and there was no other choice but to bomb a city, I think that the calculus then becomes slightly different. Now I know
Yeah.
Dom might have thoughts on that, but
No. Well, I mean,
Well,
I do I do find it interesting that the line. So we all agree that evil means are never justified, even for a good end. But we also all feel the discomfort that accompanies the fact when the bad end that follows not using bad means is huge. You know what I mean? So we all know that, like, I can't, steal something in order to look good for, I'm trying to find a good example. You can't do something bad that a good might come of it. We all agree on that. It's not like kind of pharisaical way of
it's eventually
looking
going
at.
to catch up to you, kind of that idea.
Yeah, it's yeah, and so but
you
it's
can't
like, but
you can't steal an expensive suit for your wedding because you forgot to rent one.
there you go. Yeah, that's a good
all
one.
right.
Yeah.
Don't
You-
tell that to anyone. I definitely did not do that for mine.
but the moment the odds change, we start to get uncomfortable and we dispense with that rule. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying notice how it's not some kind of change in argument. It's simply the increase in consequence, right? So we are dealing with consequentialism. And so my question is, because you brought up to me the other day, Joe, is that there's the physics, but then there's the spiritual physics, right? There's the butterfly effect in the moral progress, the moral science, right? And so what is the effect? So you might have this great effect, physically, geographically, historically, but what are the moral effects? And what are the radiation waves of the moral bomb we've just dropped right now? Right. So in other words, what grammar have we decided to opt for? Is it the grammar of of hell, right? Where the ends justify the means in certain conditions? So it is uncomfortable, I think, when you get these situations where you have to choose between, you know, uh, killing an adult to save a child that's being tortured, right? And then the adult is not, he's not responsible, he's not like involved in the process, but he is an evil person, like he's a person that I don't know, like someone that's in prison, right? And on for certain crimes. I don't know, the point being is that, like, I'm not so sure even in those uncomfortable situations we can do that. But the last thing I would
Okay.
say is about the, and I promise I'll shut up after this, but it's
No,
about,
no. I'm super interested. I'm ready.
okay. It's about would we have prevented this land invasion, like you said, Joe? I think what you said, Joe, was phenomenal. I agree with it. But here, Anscombe, who wrote about refusing the honorary degree to Truman in Oxford, she said, "I do not sorry." She put, "Given the conditions, that was probably what was averted by that action. In other words, the invasion of Japan. But what were the conditions? The unlimited objective, the fixation on unconditional surrender, the disregard of the fact that the Japanese were desirous of negotiating peace, the character
Yes.
of the Potsdam Declaration, their chance. I will not suggest, as some would like to do, that there was an exultant itch to use the new weapons, but it seems plausible to think that the consciousness of the possession of such instruments had its effect on the manner in which the Japanese were offered their chance," in quotes. So I think there's way more going on here on the moral sphere, and this is the radiation waves of the moral bomb we've dropped. So
Yeah.
that's kind of, yeah.
I think it's important to
Go ahead, Joe.
stipulate. Oh, sorry. I think it's important to stipulate. So I think that there are situations where you can drop a nuclear weapon and you can detonate a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
On,
I think I would
but-
agree with that too. Yeah.
but I think there's lots of nuance where, like, when we look back at World War II and especially specifically with
Yeah.
detonating 2 atom bombs in Japan, I think that changing the state of the negotiations and lowering the criteria of the type of surrender that the Japanese government would have had to surrender to, the terms, making the burden less. I mean, I think that's a fine argument, for why you wouldn't feel like it was necessary. Where I think we need to take a step back with the morality is, one, we can debate this. So just let me flush this out.
Go ahead.
Is it okay? Is it moral to kill enemy soldiers? like
Yes.
as your enemy. And I would say that
Yeah.
it is. And so there are situations where military actions that you take against your enemy are going to have externalities. And
Mhm.
and just the prospect of war, it's like there's going to be civilian casualties. Like
Mhm.
you know there are. And so um there's no such thing as a perfect war. That's why war is war. And so you already know that there's going to be soldiers who die, but you know that there's going to be civilian casualties. Um,
Mhm.
so the question is, what are you trying to do throughout each iteration of the military engagement? And
Mhm.
what I think you have to look at with specifically with the atom bomb is if the U.S. was in a position, which I don't think he was in, but if it was in a situation where the only means to get the Japanese government was to drop an atom bomb on a
Mhm.
city that had civilians in it, but had soldiers in it that would deplete its military to a point where it couldn't physically put up the fight anymore, I think you
Yeah.
have a stronger argument. But that wasn't necessarily the situation
Yeah. Yeah.
in Japan. They did that. The sole purpose, and I want to get into this doctrine of double effect here shortly.
Yeah.
The whole reason they did this was to use the terror of obliterating
Mhm.
cities filled with Japanese innocents
Yeah.
and using that to scare their government and force it. So by definition, it's an act of
Yeah.
terrorism. It's
Yeah.
seeking to use terror
It
as a
is. Yeah.
way as a means of persuasion. So it's like if I beat five, if I'm I think I heard this somewhere. If I'm a if I work for the police department, we're deployed to go and find a bunch of I don't know like a group of armed thugs in the cartel. If
Mhm.
I'm an ICE agent, like I can say we need to go head to head with these guys and fight them. Or maybe a way that we can have less people die in this situation is we go find the daughter of the head of that division of that cartel. We just kill her, and then he'll be so discouraged,
Yeah.
then less people will die. Well, you can't do that. Like you have to because you're
Yeah.
using the terror of your means is being the means of what you're doing is using an innocent to bring about a greater good, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that there's a distinction. And so
Yeah. I agree
this
with
doctrine
you,
of double
Joe.
effect,
Yeah.
this doctrine of double effect, which I really want to kind of hear your takes on, and if, whether or not it's especially for you, Don, like whether or not it's Catholic, because I'm not actually sure. Um,
Okay.
uh, but like for those listening, the doctrine of double effect is where an action has two effects. One is good and one is bad. And the doctrine then says, you're able to perform this specific action, um, even though it's going to produce both results,
Mhm.
both good and bad. And so that's what I mean with like the military engagement. And so like there's going to be civilian casualties, there'll be military casualties, casualties in your own military, and in your enemy's military. The conditions for the double effect is one, the bad effect is not your goal. So the goal is not to just, if you go and invade another country, the goal is not to kill civilians. That
Mhm.
would automatically make you,
Right.
it would disqualify you. Number
Mhm.
two, the bad effect is not the means to accomplish your goal. So that would
Mhm.
be bombing civilians. And number
Mhm.
three, the good effect is proportionate to the bad effect, and it has to, at a minimum, be equal. So it's neutral.
Yeah.
Um, and so I see this bombing essentially as the bad effect, or the effect that the U.S. sought to seek out was ultimate surrender. You can
Mhm.
make an argument maybe that was unreasonable, but if we say that surrender is a good thing,
Mhm.
they meet condition one. The bad effect is not a means to accomplish your goal. Well, we know that they were seeking to use the terror of bombing civilians, so it doesn't meet condition two, but we're pretty sure it meets condition three, which is the good effect is proportionate to the bad effect. And I would say that overall, you know, if you're trying to weigh 130,000 people dying compared to what would have been, possible if the alternative was only a land invasion, that could be if you could
Right.
prove that. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Joe. Right there, and what you said is crucial because so far I agree with everything you're saying. but you're talking about the good effect versus the bad effect, as if the two effects here are the bombing and the death of the civilians, or the invasion and how that works out. But what if the good effect and the bad effect is the death of the soldiers? That's the good effect, and the death of the civilians is the bad effect. Are those proportionate? I would argue no.
Can I
That's the
add
nature
some
of the bomb.
like
You see what I'm
some
saying?
context around this as well? Because I think
Sure.
Yep.
I think oftentimes in these situations, since there's no correct answer, even though I might 100% believe that I think I have the best answer, I know I'm not even. That's not the best outcome, and I think that's the reality with the
Yeah.
situation we're talking about here. I think it's important to note you had a global war. That's the situation happening here. You have Nazi Germany in Europe taking over. You have Japan in the Pacific taking over that whole area. Their goal is to conquer, right? They are aggressively taking land, taking over this. That's their goal. The U.S., their goal, right, is to kind of stop this. Also, they see it as a way to get on top as the global superpower, multiple facets. Kind of get to save the world, come in, swoop in, do what they did in World War I, save the day. The reality is, though, everyone involved in that war doesn't know what the other side's thinking. They don't know. They have ideas that we have spies, espionage is happening, but the reality is you don't actually know what the next chess move Japan's going to make if you're the American general. You can guess, but there's not transparency there. It's just the nature of war. On top of it, you're looking at Japan, which is a unique culture. This is a very prideful culture. They have amazing ability to honor their elderly. There's a very connectiveness to that culture where, like in America, we're very independent as a culture, and these are very broad generalizations. So I'm probably getting stuff wrong, but let's, for the sake of the argument, attacking Japan in this way has a significant different outcome than if you attacked America with atomic bombs. If you really want to take down America, you have to take down our independence. There's a whole different. I feel like you need more of like a psychology come in, and they're the ones leading the charge. With Japan, we almost had to communicate, or they felt like they had to communicate that whatever you do at whatever cost to protect your country, we are going to undermine it. And so whether that is, the kamikazes, who these people are willingly to sign up their lives to protect their country, that is a different level of pride than we can even imagine I can even imagine as someone in America. Like me signing up to crash my plane to help advance my country, I would say no every single day. I can't even fathom that idea.
Super quick historical note on the kamikaze thing. Then keep going, Jacob. It's a great point, because the kamikaze missions were actually started as a means to inflict the Americans with a high enough amount of military casualties that they would lessen the terms of surrender.
Right.
And,
that's great context. Yeah. So I think going back to my first point, the Americans don't know what the Japan are thinking, but they're looking and saying they're willing to just expense individuals in this way. Yes, America makes calculated decisions of how many people are we going to lose in Normandy, right? There was a number that they came up with, and they knew exactly well, but it wasn't broadcast. It was hidden behind scene because they knew essentially American people couldn't handle knowing this is how many people we were willing to let die. In Japan, it was come sign up, right? Because you are doing a duty to your country. And I don't think it's worth talking about the good, the bad in that sense. The point being made, we don't know each other's strategy, but the Americans are looking at them saying they're going to an extent America will never be at in terms of willing to win this war. At the same time, what it will take for America to win this war with the current methods is so devastating. We can't comprehend it. These bombs might solve both those problems, and we have them at our disposal. And so I think that's some of the context going into this whole debate of good, bad. There's a little bit. That's where this gets.
It's definitely
so
a tricky situation, and that's the thing. It goes back to that thing. It's like we all agree that doing something bad so that something good might happen isn't justifiable. But suddenly, when the odds, when the result becomes much more cataclysmic, then we're suddenly willing to talk about doing bad things for a good ends. So
Yeah,
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 but I'm acknowledging
okay.
the trickiness of that
Correct.
psychologically and even like philosophically. I'm not denying it. Yeah, not at all. But I think reading Anscombe and this and also how can we show them that we will stop at nothing? I don't think it was necessary. And I think that we really wanted to show American, kind of power basically, and but I understand it is tricky. But again, it goes back to, well, I think the spiritual bomb, right? Like,
And
how come we've gotten to this place again? How come technology has gone in that direction? Which is what we were talking about earlier, which is what is technology for? Is it eschatological? Is it ethical? Anyway, that's kind of really everything we're talking about.
well, something. This is kind of a swing, so maybe I'll try to.
Maybe we should get back to the
I'll,
movie eventually.
I, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea. I think that's a good idea. One of the things I thought the timing of this movie may have been. This might be reading into it a little bit because I don't know when Nolan first started writing the script, but
Hmm.
it's like I imagine, when Oppenheimer's asked, can you hear the music, and he's looking up into
Yeah.
the sky. There's a part of me that wonders, like, does Elon Musk ever think that? When he thinks of AI, or the
Mm.
the head of OpenAI or whatever, like, was Nolan offering like a critique? Like for instance, could the phrase, that the prophecy, "I've become death, the destroyer of worlds," is that something that Nolan's using about the advent of AI? Is that something that's right at our doorstep, where like,
Mm.
we know that we already know what brilliance has done, or what a corrupted humanity has brought about through its brilliance. What's to be said about something that is super intelligent at some point? Like, what's the?
Are
Do
we
you
kind
think
of
that movie is an analogy for today?
are we yeah kind of transitioning to the whole idea of like why now? Why had
Yeah.
this movie come out now? What can we learn from it? What has our society grown from this time period? And what are we falling in blindly just like they did?
And there is
There's a
one other major subject I want to cover. So before
For
we
sure.
go, I definitely want
Yeah,
to
Okay.
cover
Yeah.
that
for
one
sure.
too. But
But
let's
it
flesh
really
this
goes
one out.
back to how far do we want to push technology? But also sometimes it stops. Like you just does not. You can't go further because reality's got this barrier. I think AI is one of those things where there is a barrier because it can only imitate us. I think, and like even a computer can imitate, like, it can be more intelligent in one sense, but it's not more intelligent in another sense. I think we're
Mhm.
already experiencing the effects of AI just with the internet because everything is run by algorithms. Everything is, what your, Amazon, the way you buy things, the way the ads you see, the feeds you get on YouTube, the feeds you get on Twitter, the feeds you get on Facebook. It's all like adapted through these algorithms. And I think that I don't think we realize how that's actually really affecting us. Um, yeah, I don't think we realize it yet.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think there's a whole idea behind technology is always limited by one of two sides: the theory or the materials. So, an example of this: early 2000s tech boom. We had fiber optic cable. That was not a new technology, but it was the best technology. Companies invested tons and tons of resources to fiber optics, but the theory and like the non-material side of things wasn't caught up quite yet. So
Hmm.
you ended up having all these companies go bankrupt because they had all this fiber optics technology, what we're still using today, but they didn't have a need for it. And you see this in the movie where they're filling the fish bowls. This is
Yeah.
plutonium, this is uranium. Which one can we enrich quick enough to fill? There's this limitation between the theory and then the actual practical coming out.
Hmm.
AI throws a big loophole into this as well because it's a whole new thing. So right now, you look at, I love using iPhones as an example, or really any smartphone. For a long time there's a series of years, every time a smartphone came out, it was amazing. It was
Yeah.
wildly different. You wanted to go get it because it was just completely completely new. Now when
Yeah.
something launches, the camera is slightly better, but no one can even
Yeah.
tell with the naked eye, right?
Yeah.
We've kind of hit that max with at least smartphones of both the theory and the materials are maxed out of technology innovation. AI kind of came in and said, well, here's now a new thing that we haven't thought about, but we can implement, and it might replace what we were limited with before. You see this maybe like quantum computing as well. Right now, we don't really have either side. The theory is not quite there. Yes, we have it, but the material's not there to really create it, and that would cause the next leap. So there's always this push and pull between the theory and then the materials. Is it actually possible to carry out?
Yeah.
And you see that a little bit in the movie with the fish
Yeah,
bowls, but
definitely.
this whole push as well of there's a community, global community of physicists solving the same problem, same goal in mind, and then they all get divided because there's a war breakout between the countries, but they all are trying to achieve the exact same thing. Nothing really changes. Just so happens one is able to accomplish because they kind of get both of those parts perfect, where they have the right amount of material, they have the right theory, they can implement them there.
Yeah.
So how that plays into today, I think we have this push and pull. When one is limited, another props up. It might take some time before the material technology catches up, but eventually it does. And whether in the meantime, when that vacuum is created, other technologies come up, and I think that's where AI is. We kind of got stuck as a society. We kind of hit our achievements. AI came in and is saying, let's reinvent what technology could be, and now we're starting over again. Similar to when they made the nuclear bomb.
I've always wondered, I don't know, Dom, if this is even a phrase in theological circles, but something called, which I call sociological free will. Like,
what do you mean?
Does God? So, I mean, obviously, there's the theory that everyone has free will in their own individual person, but do societies themselves have their own choice and destiny?
I see
and
what you mean. Like a collective free will?
Yeah, because there's this idea out there that you might hear from theists and whatnot that he's got the whole world in his hands, and you watch this movie, it's like, I'm not so sure about this, like, and and so sometimes I think about Armageddon and the last days, what in the world that possibly looks like. I don't really. I agree with the Orthodox. Well, I'm not even sure we should have that book Revelation in our Bible, but but
you really just want to like make friends and enemies, don't you, Joe?
Yeah, but
anyway, out the canonized Bible.
It's just you Protestants did that a long time ago. So
no, let me. We corrected the record.
All right. Yeah. So shoot, where was I going with that?
Sociological free
will.
I
was talking about Armageddon. Yeah, Armageddon. The idea of of what we bring about. Like ultimately, if you read like the Christian narrative, like we bring about our own Armageddon in a way. And it almost seems like Revelation, if read at a very high and abstract level, is an evaluation of the ultimate destiny of our corrupt and sinful state, where either on an individual or some sort of sociological level, we are eventually going to destroy ourselves in some way, and that will be when things come to a wrap. And a new world is created, and I see like things like artificial intelligence and I mean, if you want to say nuclear weapons, I mean, you look at the Russia-Ukraine war; those are certainly things that, once again, those topics are coming up. but it almost seems like a ticking time bomb. There was a Sam Harris, who's like one of my favorite atheists. He was talking about like I think it's called the black ball theory, where
Yeah.
you have a bag full of you have an infinite number of bags full of 100 marbles, but one of them's black. And every year we basically just stuck our hand into the bag of marbles and we pull one out, and it's not a black marble, so the world doesn't end, And it kind of feels like sometimes
Yeah.
that's what we're living under, where or at least with the advent of AI, that we're entering a new phase of you can program with image facial image detection systems. You can have drones fly and do assassinations of global leaders. I mean, there's all sorts of things that could happen. And I guess going back to this whole idea of sociological free will, like, do we have in a Catholic sense the freedom to destroy ourselves as a civilization?
Absolutely, I think so.
So
But
these are real. So there's no God's going to save us if we accidentally pull the trigger, and because one of the most compelling parts of the movie is when they're like, "Oh, holy crap! This might destroy the world. This might light the atmosphere on fire." Well, it's almost zero. That's the black ball. That's the black marble.
Well, there's a difference between like, are we gonna do it? Like, do we know that in the future versus do we have the freedom to do it? Like, I think we definitely have the freedom to do it. All it takes is, nuclear holocaust. Like, we just kill each other through a Cold War that becomes hot. Like, but is it going to happen? And the Christian can, the whole theological topic of predestination, right, and free will comes into play, because will God, basically wipe out the human race, and that is the Book of Revelation. I interpret the Book of Revelation differently. It's more like, it's in the Lamb, and the people worshiping the Lamb isn't like a different realm, a different dimension, and then there's us, and we're like eating each other apart. It's the same world. It's actually what Christ brings about. He transforms us.
Yeah.
And so I think that there is
It's
an
the New
evolution
Jerusalem
here.
kind of idea.
Yeah. So I think that I think if we can start to realize that technological developments, and progress, if we just kind of shifted it a little bit, where we have the moral in mind, the moral good in mind, then suddenly certain things where I don't think we should be, certain roads we shouldn't be going down, will stop going down. And certain ones we should will start going down. So it's more of a shifting of perspectives. So disarmament, stuff like that. I mean, the church has talked about this at length, but it's like we should be using technology once again for ethics and for the common good, not in a way to create a new world, because it will result in self-destruction. That's why when he creates the atomic bomb, right, he discovers divine power. He's the Prometheus. He is a titan. He's a god. He's given to humanity this atomic bomb, and suddenly he discovers that he, like the burning bush, has a divine name. And what is it? Death, destroyer of worlds. That's what happens when humanity grasps that divinity to make heaven into earth and ends up destroying the world. And all I'm saying is that if you make sure that technology and politics isn't about that, but about what's right and wrong, and leave the eschatological to the trust in a God who is love, then in the present, you can make a difference. And through that, I think the world can become a better place. You have a shift in priority. And I think that's what the movie told me and made me think about, which is, this is a commentary on contemporary man. It's a commentary on our situation, on our priorities, on our moral landscape, which is, to borrow a phrase from Sam Harris, which is devastated, right? It's a horrendous moral landscape. I think it's because we've divorced science from morality, we've divorced matter from spirit, temporal from spiritual. All these divorces ends up discarding the former and venerating the latter, and that's where we are. That's where we are now, and we think we're all just atoms in the void. That's what Oppenheimer is about to me. And that's why I think he should have been a little bit more villainized, I think, because in real life, he had good intentions, I'm sure, but villainized because we should be villainized, I think. I'm a little pessimistic, as you can hear, but but it's not without that Christian hope, right?
Anyway, he is kind of like he is like Nietzsche's new man.
He absolutely is. Yeah, he's Prometheus. He really is. He represents us in Prometheus bound. Prometheus represents man and also represents the divine. That's why he's a titan. right? And there's this fascinating line actually in the play where I think it's the muses who say to him that even you, a god will come down and go to hell for you to save you. It's like, and
Right.
you read Prometheus Bound, and like the Christological parallels are uncanny. It's pretty incredible, but it's almost like Prometheus is sometimes similar to Christ, sometimes the exact opposite of Christ. And so I think that's what we're wrestling with, is the Übermensch of Nietzsche is an antichrist, quite literally. Um, anyway, but it's not to say that we're all going to shit, right? I mean, it's just to say that I think we need to
Yeah.
start talking as a culture about what is more relevant and more important. Where are our priorities? What about moral ecology? What about moral science? What about human progress? Progress in humanism, not just in physics. Like, physics is great, but it's like, clearly it's not the most important thing. Anyway, but that takes a lot to shift your perspective on something like that, because we're so used to this scientific worldview,
I think
scientistic, more like.
I think that's why it's very important to think he was the best physicist for the job. And I say that, like,
Yeah,
I don't know who else they interviewed and so forth, but he did the job very well, got it done by the deadline that was very aggressive, and that was his job.
yeah,
And I think you kind of see him wrestling with this: is this morally good or bad? How does this play into what I think about the world? But then he
yeah,
still went into the office and did his job.
yeah,
And I think that's where, as a society, you have those checks and balances of like an ethics review board to review: is this behavior good? Not
yeah,
should we do this, or is this possible or not possible? That's the job for Oppenheimer
yeah,
to answer. It wasn't
exactly.
should we do this or not should we do this? Because quite
Yeah,
frankly, what I know about him, I don't think he'd be the right person to answer that question. He's a very
yeah, I agree.
complex. He contradicts himself um, through his
Yeah,
personal and professional life, and so you almost need another uh, person who can really grapple with that. Who is the best person at that job? And
yeah,
so, in terms of did he do something right or wrong, he did. I think there's a little bit of he did his job and he was the best person for it, and
yeah,
what he was achieving, he it was beyond just making a bomb. I think he advanced physics and science as a whole tremendously, and I think that's part of the factor of him doing this as well. It wasn't just to kill the Nazis.
undoubtedly, yeah. But should it have happened? Yeah,
Correct, right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so
But
I
I
think
agree. Yeah,
that's where it gets difficult. In the movie, I think
yeah,
wrestles with this slightly, even when Florence character commits suicide there,
oh yeah,
and his wife comes and basically says you can't commit the sin and not expect any consequences.
yeah,
Wrestling
exactly.
kind of like, he's a very conflicted man. She's talking about this in the context of him, his mistress dying, but also with
Yeah,
this looming, will this bomb be good for society that I'm
yeah.
creating, and it's going to be successful in any moment now.
And I truly think
Well,
he thought the
oh,
bomb would be good for society. I just think he's wrong, but I truly think he thought that. I really do. That's why he is so complex.
Well, and then on the flip side, right? The people who tapped oil for the first time and created that, it was a slower transition into mainstream adoption, but oil
Yeah.
has had more deaths than nuclears have, probably
Hmm.
total. If you just talk about accidents and creating it from
Yeah.
spills, we don't need to get into details. Same thing with even renewable energies. Certain renewable energies can be very dirty, and there's been deaths attributed there. So looking at it from like an energy perspective, nuclear is pretty safe, but so it
Yeah.
really becomes there's no perfect solution.
well, I think that brings up um, kind of the last, and I don't know why I keep focusing on this section of the movie, but the
Uh huh.
going back to the can you hear the music?
Oh yeah.
and it kind of also made me think of quantum physics, which I certainly am not qualified to speak on, but the limited knowledge that I possess about it is that one of the revelations, if you will, of quantum mechanics and the quantum field is that it seems as if the reality doesn't exist unless it's consciously observed,
Yeah.
which is such an interesting idea. And it's something that I think is it's more abstractly drawn out through Oppenheimer, but it's a deep, very deep theological idea. It dates back, just to Genesis 1, where it talks about God saying, "Let there be light," and clearly that through the mind and then through the divine logos, at essence brings into being existence, of the material world,
Can you give
and
examples
and,
of
and
maybe
spiritual.
for that? Some examples that plays out.
Specifically in specifically in the "Can you hear the music?" Because it's his mind, like it's his mind that's comprehending and grappling with this, and yeah, specifically, um, I think it's interesting that part of it kind of goes back to the creative spark thing, where we have to conceptualize and theorize the things that we bring into being, and the idea that the universe just pops into existence, without being consciously thought into being, is something that is deeply Christian. And the critique of, or not the critique, but the problem of human nature is that we are, while we are image bearers of God, and because we have the rational component, we have, as Gregory of Nyssa talks about, there's the vegetative soul, the emotional soul, and then there's the rational soul. Like we have rational capabilities, so we comprehend and we think things out over. But what we bring about always has the stain of some sort of sin, of some sort of corruption, and that theory is obviously brought out through the whole movie. But a more, I would say, even more abstract thought is the fact of what Oppenheimer specialized in, which was quantum physics, and how science has actually slowly begun to come back around to that understanding that you must perceive something in order for it to exist. And I wasn't sure, like Dom, if you had anything, or Jacob.
Well,
if you
the
had
problem
anything.
is I'm afraid to go down a massive tangent, so I'll try not to. But I was actually listening to.
It's our last tangent. It's fine.
Okay, last tangent. Well, I was listening to Dr. Connor Cunningham. That's kind of, I stole from him the question of is there life before death, but he kind of makes the point. I might be butchering it, but he kind of makes the point that quantum physics actually destroys physics. It puts an end to physics. It puts an end to Newton and Bacon, because going back to the idea that the science presupposes a methodological reduction for it to be effective. So the patient has to be as if dead, even though he's not actually, in order to operate. You treat as if he is not a living human being. You have to put him under, basically. So you have to reduce the scope of reality for your tool, which is science in this case, medical science, to be effective. But you have to remember then that the tool is not describing the totality of reality, but only an aspect of it in a way that's effective for the technology, for what you're trying to do. And so I think Bacon especially, but and Newton, they had this and you see this in John Locke and other classically liberal thinkers. They have, because they're trying to make Newton physics work with philosophy. And the way they see it is that everything is this it's the mechanistic worldview, that there's building blocks, atoms, or whatever you want to call it, whatever's smaller, the Bose-Einstein or whatever, I don't know. So there's these building blocks to the world, and that's matter. So matter is this stuff for them. But that's a radical departure from the classical view of matter, which was mere potential. It wasn't anything. Matter didn't exist unless it was thought and formed. So quantum physics is actually vindicating the classical way of thinking of matter and of physics. And Bacon and Newton, what we're seeing is that their way of viewing physics was effective as a reduction of reality for technology. But in other words, matter doesn't exist. Matter is pure potential. Point to matter. You're going to point to dirt? No, that's not matter. That's dirt, right? That's a
Mhm.
chair. That's a thing. There's always a form with it. There's a neutron is not a proton because it has the form neutron, the form proton. You can't have matter apart from form. So matter doesn't exist unless there's form. Form is another way of saying thought, right? So that's why thought and matter are inseparable. And so that points to a consciousness that's greater than ourselves in a certain sense. Yeah.
On this topic, just to make sure I'm understanding, are you kind of talking about like the philosophy behind it, or it as a study there as well? I feel like you can,
Yeah, so
is it a study of a study, or is it the study itself
it's
that you're really
it's more like
honing
the
in on
philosophy
that?
of science. So like Bacon and Newton were treating the world as if it was a mechanistic world made up of what
Yeah.
some atheists call mereological simples. So it's this idea that there's this ultimate simple God particle, right? As the
Yeah.
physicists try to find the God
That
particle.
ultimately, the world, the universe, is deducible to predictive and explainable
Yeah.
equations.
It's all
Right.
one big mechanism. It's like on the beach, you have sand, you can build it into a castle, you can build it into a tree, but it's all sand. It's all grains of sand, right? The pebble of sand is the mereological simple, is what they'd call it, right? So it's got this view of matter where matter is a building block. But the ancients were saying matter doesn't exist apart from form. In other words, quantum mechanics is vindicating is when you look down deep, it's not a wave and it's not a particle, or wait, it is a wave and it is a particle. Wait, it depends on how I look at it. Oh, wait, it depends whether I'm looking at it. Suddenly you realize that there is no such thing as a mereological simple or a mechanistic worldview where everything is broken down to these fundamental atoms. You need form, you need thoughts, and so that vindicates that science as a technology is limited. And so that's the danger, is if we view the world strictly through science, then that can actually devastate our moral heritage. The dignity of the person gets chucked out of the window, and then we can have these conversations about the extent to which
Well,
technology
maybe a
should
better word, would be materialism, because
yeah,
I think that a lot of times
it
different
is
subjects have
materialism.
arrows, like they have arrows to other sorts of study, and so you can have the sciences, like I, I kind of see it as like the sciences reach their limit with quantum mechanics, right? And you
Hmm.
have where you have uncertainty, but that's just
Yeah.
that's only a problem if you're a materialist. That's not a problem if you have
Oh no,
other
yeah.
subjects at your disposal, and so
Oh,
we
absolutely.
can swing over into a, okay, so if we have to be consciously aware of things in order for them to exist, then the question is what what is the morality, what is the framework of the consciousness that brought into existence our universe,
Yeah.
right, or the multiverse, and that's kind of where you get into the spiritual physics dynamic, where
Yeah.
if we're imitators of God, then kind of what you're getting at with the development of the nuclear bomb, it's like, well,
Mhm.
that's done through ultimately through a survival instinct. It's not done through the instinct of, what would you call it, like agape or of divine love. That's
Yeah.
done through like frankly a very minimal survival based instinct, and that seems to be our problem. In fact, it kind of goes back to the old Garden of Eden problem, where you have some of the early church fathers who often said that, the tree of knowledge of good of evil, of course they could have eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God was just going to have them develop and mature in the garden until they were ready for knowledge,
Mm.
and then they could partake of the tree of knowledge of good and
Yeah.
evil. But they ate it too soon, and it feels like our curse here on earth is that, we have intelligence, we have the ratio, we have the ability to think about things, but we still are ultimately reduced to like the amygdala in our brains,
Hmm.
and 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 that's the paradox of the human experience in a way.
Yeah.
And I think that's honestly what the movie just captures and just but in a very majestic, but also captivating and terrifying way.
One thing
So
that I really appreciated about the movie is that all it did was ask questions. I really appreciate that
yes,
because I didn't feel like I was being preached at, and that I very much appreciate, especially from a movie coming from Hollywood.
right,
Well, and I
So
think the
yeah,
parts they kept it within the context of the time period as well. They didn't
yes,
try to bring
yeah,
up like social issues today and
exactly,
apply them to the story happening. Uh, we're looking
yeah,
at 70 years ago. They, you know,
yeah,
at one point they make a comment when there was one of the women who was on the Manhattan Project.
yeah,
They're, you know, saying, I don't know if you should be working on this because your reproductive system,
yeah.
you know, might be compromised.
I
And
remember
she
that
makes a
scene.
joke,
Yeah,
you know, yours is
yeah,
much more exposed than mine, right? So it's still
yeah,
highlighting that, yeah, women are fighting for rights at this time period, and that's a huge push. But
yeah, yeah.
you know, it's not the focus was on, hey, let's can this be done?
Yeah, and he
I
did
think
the
that
same
was
thing in
great.
Dunkirk. That's good with him. He's got that sense of realism, and that's why I appreciate him. Yeah.
yeah. I think I know. I think that that's why I love Christopher Nolan, and I really want
Oh
to.
yeah.
I can't. I hope he's not going to retire. I heard that he
I'm
might
pretty
retire,
sure
and I
he.
just
Yeah, he said
he,
he's gonna do it till he dies. I think he said.
good.
Yeah.
He
He's not
needs
a
to.
Quentin Tarantino only making 12 and calling it quits on
Yeah.
us, setting us
Yeah.
all up for failure.
But like, can I
Well,
just say the music, incredible. Like it was like its own character, and obviously the cinematography, all in IMAX, and the suspense and the build up. I just thought I knew when I walked away that this was a special movie, but I didn't want to judge it right away. I wanted to let it sit, and then I went to see it a second time, and I was like, this is not just special. This is important, and our
yeah,
conversation bears that out. I think.
I certainly think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on the movie, guys, or do you feel good?
A plus, 10 out of 10.
Hey,
Go watch it.
yeah, go watch it,
Yeah.
guys. Go watch it. All right. Well, that is going to bring to a conclusion our fifth episode, number 5. All right, on Yuppies and Harpoons. If you guys like this episode, please like and subscribe, and also do me a favor. Go over to Dom's friend, my friend Dom's channel, the Logos Project. That is
Thank you.
the Logos Logos Project, and give him a like and a subscribe for all his videos. He does
We should make
phenomenal
sure
work.
it's in the description, you know, the
Oh yeah, we will put that in the link.
video
We'll put
notes for
that
sure.
in the link
Thank
in
you.
the description there. And Dom, it was a pleasure having you. And I guess it was good having Jacob. I'm gonna have to put up with him if we're.
Wow.
All right, that's it for
Done.
now. Thanks again. See you guys.
Thanks,
Yuppies
guys.
and Harpoons.
All right, see ya. Yuppies and Harpoons.